This revenge requires a little bit of background information. I live in a city where street parking is the primary source of parking. I was lucky enough to find a house that had a driveway for my use and shared this driveway with my two roommates. We all worked different schedules, had different days off, and sometimes walked to work. This meant that at any given point, we had 3 cars in the driveway, single file, and frequently had 1 or more cars in the driveway all day. The driveway was included in our lease as our responsibility and part of our property, save for the innermost end where our landlord had a detached garage she used for storage. That garage and the 10 feet in front of it were in her jurisdiction, but the entire driveway leading into that area belonged to the renters. Our house and the apartment building next door frame our driveway on either side. One morning, I'm getting ready to walk to work when I hear a knock on the door. I answer, and there are 2 random men on my porch. They tell me that I need to move my car because my landlord gave the neighboring apartment building permission to use our driveway while it is getting its roof replaced. I called my landlord to see what's up, and she told me that the owner of the apartment building had asked her if they could use the driveway to park a dumpster while the roofing company worked. She had given them permission to use the 10 feet in front of the garage, but told them we had the rights to the driveway and that they'd need to get separate permission from us to use the driveway. I tell my landlord they hadn't asked, and now I have 2 men on my porch and a full cadre of roofers dependent on me moving my car, which I hadn't planned to move, and she verbally shrugs and tells me to work it out with them. I told them that I'd moved my car that day, but they needed to compensate me for any and all parking fees. Mistake. My job didn't have a parking lot, and street parking cost upwards of $15, $20 per day. As a newer graduate of grad school, I had a lot of debt and not a lot of disposable income. My roommates are in similar situations. I didn't want to pay for parking on top of all my other bills, so the roofing company agrees to repay all parking fees as long as I keep my receipts. The roofing company also states that they'll be done within a week and that they only need to get the dumpster in. Then my roommates and I will have full access to the driveway again. Sounded reasonable. As you probably figured, given that I'm posting here, this is not what happened. On any given day during the month and a half-long construction, the roofing company woke my roommates or me up to have us move our cars out of the driveway so they could park their trucks in it. We went from being assured we'd have full access to our driveway to being told that they'd be throwing objects from the roof to the dumpster, and that if they happened to hit our cars with projectiles and damage them, then that was our liability that we assumed by parking there. I don't believe any of this is legally true, but also knew that it was unlikely that I'd have the time or money to pursue a claim. They assured us that they would work from 8-5 each day and be done by the time we were back from work. Yet my roommates were often left circling the neighborhood to find parking while the roofing company worked until 7 or 8 o'clock. Some days, we would preemptively move our cars, only to have the roofing company not show up to work at all that day. It wasted a lot of our time and cost us way more in parking than we'd anticipated. On to the revenge aspect. On our end, my roommates and I kept a log of every time they asked us to vacate the driveway. Every time they blocked the driveway and prevented us from parking, we kept every receipt we had for parking on street or in a lot. We kept a log of every conversation we had with the company and the promises they made. I emailed our landlord after every conversation to keep her in the loop on our negotiations because she'd screwed us over pretty handily in this scenario and tried to pass the buck on any responsibility for it. She was supportive of our decisions, but also firm that she would take no part in the negotiations. We also kept a log of the conversations we had with the apartment building owner. Side note, he was adamant that the cost of parking wasn't a big deal and that we should just eat it. When I balked at that statement, said that he'd work out a deal with the grocery store across the street to have them set aside 3 permanent parking spots for our use. This grocery store rhymes with Vaderhose and is notorious for having insufficient parking for its own customers. I laughed and asked him to let me know how that negotiation goes. He, unsurprisingly, never responded. We also wrote up a memo detailing the agreement we'd made with the roofing company foreman. They'd agreed to repay us all parking fees, a $25 fee every time they asked us to move cars before 8 or after 5, and also agreed to pay us for every day they went over schedule. Does this agreement seem too good to be true? That's because it was. It became clear as the project wore on that the roofing company had no intention of paying us anything for the parking or inconvenience. My roommates and I saw that they were nearing the end of the construction and discussed what we were going to do. Each of us had amassed $100 or so in parking fees, and we knew they were going to try and run. One morning, sure enough, I left the house and a man I'd never seen on the site runs up to me and demands that I move my and my roommate's car so they can remove the dumpster. The project is done. I told him we would. Just as soon as we received our payment, as agreed. This man claims to be a personal friend of the apartment building manager and calls over a man he says is the roofing company owner. Neither one of these men have ever been on site before this day, nor have they been present for any of the conversations about parking. So, of course, they claim complete ignorance to the conversations in the agreement and accuse me of extortion. The supposed personal friend of the apartment building manager is a real, lovely piece of work who uses every condescending argument to try and intimidate and scare me. He calls me little girl in every accusation and threatens to sue me. I tell him that I'd be happy to be sued. I've kept a log of every interaction and have written dated materials backing up those conversations, as well as time-stamped emails detailing the conversations to my landlord. Oh, and I'm also a lawyer. I don't practice, but that wasn't necessary for him to know right then. That friend and the company's owner argued with my roommate and me for over an hour. I called her outside for support. If I was going to get tag-teamed, I wanted my own partner. They tried everything from screaming us down to belittling us, to pleading poverty and asking us if we were really going to bankrupt this poor roofing company because of our heartlessness. They tried everything. That supposed friend argued that we didn't deserve to get paid because we were technically able to park in driveway at all times. We just chose not to because of the liability. The owner argued, at the same time, that we didn't deserve to get paid because there were days our cars were in the driveway and that liability prevented the company from working. When we pointed out that hypocrisy, they moved on to the next tactic. The thing was, though, that this whole issue arose because the company and the apartment building owner never applied for the parking permits to reserve street spots for the trucks. This whole issue was premised on the fact that the company didn't do the preliminary work necessary for doing a construction job in a big city, and were attempting to force their way through a project that they didn't have the permits to complete. As soon as my roommate and I reminded them of that fact, they backed down and got the money to pay us back. There was no profit to be made from this scenario, but we did get enough to repay us for all of the parking fees and all of the time we had to take moving our cars and accommodating their project. The company's foreman sent us an email calling us heartless witches and asked us why we were so mean. We replied politely thanking the company for paying us back the money due and advised them that their right to use the driveway was terminated by 5 o'clock that day. If the dumpster was still in the driveway after then, we'd call to have it towed. Backstory. Okay, so this isn't something that happened to me, but to my dad. This happened when my dad was dating my mom, so I'm not in this story, nor are my sisters. Also, it might be important to mention that this is my first post, so if anyone reads this, feel free to comment and let me know if I did anything wrong. So, my dad used to be a banker for a Switzerland-based bank in Dubai. The bank had events and games for their employees who had gotten the highest amounts of sales. My dad was one of them. The scam. This year, the company had arranged a trip to Las Vegas for their greatest employees, but the trip was canceled due to problems. The company, wanting to keep up the hopes of the employees who were worthy of going for the trip, decided to hold some casino games in Dubai. In Dubai, it is illegal to gamble with real money, so the company created fake money to use instead of real money. The fake money in the end could be traded in for real money or some gifts. So my dad and his co-workers played a bunch of games, and in the end, they were pretty loaded with fake money. A supervisor knew that my dad and his coworkers had a lot of fake money. The supervisor had more and decided to help them. "Oh, hey." The supervisor greeted Dad. "Hello. Is there something you need?" "Actually, I was wondering if you both," referring to my dad and the other coworker, "could give me all of your fake money." "Why would we do that?" "I don't know. Maybe because I'm your supervisor." Dad, not wanting to lose his job, said, "I understand that, sir, but we worked hard to get this money." "All right, look, I already have the most money out of you and your coworker, so I thought that if we pooled in our money and won a few more games, we would have a lot. I will split the money equally after." They both then hand over their money because they thought that this was a good idea. Also, they didn't want to lose their job. As the supervisor promised, he won a couple of games, and by the end, he had a lot of money. The next day, the supervisor walked into the office with 2 brand new laptops. 2. This may not seem like a lot to you, rich boy, but to my dad, who worked a lot to become a banker, it seemed like a lot. Everybody congratulated the supervisor on the 2 new computers, and nobody thought about it too much, except my dad and his coworker, who still hadn't received their share of the money. When they inquired about the supervisor, just said what money and left for his work. Now, apparently, my dad says that this was a good thing. Let me explain. There was another supervisor who watched the stupid supervisor take money from poor, helpless employees. Let's call this supervisor Joe. Do you remember that I said this was around the time when my dad was dating my mom? Joe was good friends with my mom's dad, my maternal grandfather. My grandfather started asking whether Dad was a good guy or not. Joe told my grandfather that he was a kind, straightforward type of guy, all based on my dad giving the supervisor the money. So that worked out, but we still haven't given the supervisor his sweet, sweet revenge. The revenge. My dad made it his personal agenda in life to make sure that the supervisor was fired. He snitched about it to all the surrounding supervisors that this guy stole my dad and his coworkers' money and wasn't giving it back. Unfortunately, the other supervisors just sighed like this was normal. But my dad didn't stop. He took it to the highest representative of the branch he worked in, and the supervisor was promptly fired. Think it is over? Oh no. The supervisor had started working in an oil company, and my dad was still angry that he hadn't gotten his share of the money. In a lot of countries, they take this seriously as fraud and could get you a massive fine or even arrested. My dad told the boss of the supervisor to be careful as he was likely to do a fraud, and boom, the very next day, this loser had done a fraud indeed and was sent to jail with a massive fine